know it's this. It's like a perk in the talk of this shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion new single, my hater, the big better put on the road, I just spit. I know we got $1 million, the devil, that shit ain't not cheaper than
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. Here we present you different world stories and adaptations. This is the 9th part of What If Saitama Enters Dragon Ball God's Arena. Smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Like a pig, with a final energy attack, the 3S class heroes and the only remaining heroes that stood even a remote chance of fending this monster off were killed, leaving no one left to stop this monster's calamitous conquering of planet Earth. Well, it appears that's all taken care of. Now, let me get back to business. Frieza flew up and traveled back to the site where Zarbon and the rest of his foot soldiers were standing. The soldiers loosened up when they saw the smile on Frieza's face and the relaxed way his arms were at his sides. This meant they didn't have to worry about being test targets for his anger or amusement. "I'm assuming those three are dead?" asked Zarbon. "Do you really have to ask?" said Frieza. "My apologies, I just thought one of them might have been smart enough to submit to your will." "I did too." Harmath's curiosity piqued, and he spoke out. "What would you like us to do, Lord Frieza?" "Let's see." Frieza put his fingers under his chin and thought of the best course of action. After pondering for a few moments, he managed to lay out his future plans and pointed to Harmath and Orlan. "I've decided, since I'm in a good mood, and I mean a really good mood, I'll give the two of you promotions and your very own planet. After all, if it wasn't for you, this opportunity for immortality would have never come across." The two foot soldiers felt like they'd been transported to Cloud 9. Just barely managing to contain their happiness and jump into the sky, their bodies momentarily shook and they instantly made a 90-degree bow to their master. "Thank you so much, Lord Frieza," squealed Harmath. Frieza softly chuckled. "It is just the kind of gentleman I am. Now that the biggest threats have been practically dealt with, we can begin colonizing this planet. Zarbon, call in a construction ship and tell them to bring equipment for a Class 10 commanding base." Zarbon's eyebrows raised up. The way that construction worked depended on the type of planet they were colonizing. If the planet was just a small dust ball with only local resources and very few indigenous people, then a Class 1 base would be produced, meaning there'd only a very small base with maybe 5-10 soldiers and perhaps a healing pod if they were lucky. But a Class 10 base was the highest ranking class in the construction line, and it meant that not only would there be several hundred soldiers, but there would also be dozens of high-end regeneration tanks, a communications station, advanced research facility, factories for products such as blasters, scouters, and armor, and even a training campus. Oftentimes, Class 10 bases would house the highest-ranking members of the Galactic Frieza Army, implying that Frieza intended to stay here for quite a while. "Yes, my lord." Now before I return to the ship, Frieza turned around to the bulk of the soldiers. "Is there any other information that might be useful? Like, did you find out about any more powerful warriors or other organizations that would either join us or be a threat to the Galactic Frieza Army?" Well, some of the soldiers were having a tough time speaking up, as being on the spotlight wasn't something they were used to. One soldier with yellow skin and a bulky frame spoke up. "When we were scouting the cities, we noticed that in almost all of the cities, there was at least one individual with a power level of over 10,000. Frieza curiously hummed. "That was certainly noteworthy." Another soldier with red skin and large fangs in the crowd followed up. "And at the farthest city, our scouters detected several power levels. Most of them were only a couple hundred, but there were a few energy levels that ranged in the thousands. Two of them even had a power level of 30,000. It was so powerful, my scouter momentarily malfunctioned." Frieza nodded his head, clearly impressed with the high energy levels. "Nice, very nice. Those kind of power levels could definitely be useful." "Alright then, it's decided. I'm going to return to the ship for some quality me time, and after a good night's rest, I'm going to go down to the location of this horde of power levels to negotiate. Meanwhile, the rest of you who aren't grievously injured span out to the remaining cities and begin spreading the word of their new ruler. The soldiers who are injured, return to the ship and wait for your turn in the regeneration machines. For cities that have warriors too powerful for you to handle, just leave them for me to handle tomorrow. Is that understood?" All of the soldiers saluted their master and shouted out in unison, "Yes, Lord Frieza." "Excellent. Take this Dr. Genos and the regenerator back to the ship." 4 soldiers who weren't brutally injured picked up Dr. Genos and Zombiman and began their flight back to the main ship. Likewise, Frieza and Zarbon fly together in the air and soared on ahead of the soldiers carrying the bodies. "I'm glad to see that you're so content, Lord Frieza," exclaimed Zarbon. "You've really amazed me with your new form." "It is glorious, isn't it?" gloated Frieza. "With that caped baldy out of the way, nobody on this mudball can fend off the Frieza force. Planet Earth is finally yours." While traveling city and returning to the headquarters, the hero hunter Garu was trailing behind the heroes by a few dozen meters. At the moment, Garu had no idea what to do. The level of power displayed by Saitama and Frieza was astounding. They kept on pushing their limits and achieving new levels of strength like it was nothing. Garu had no doubt in his mind that Frieza could annihilate him with only a light touch. The only way for him to put an end to that beast was to become even stronger. But how? How could that be done? The gap between them was just too big to be filled, and he had absolutely no idea how to lessen the gap. Garu's vision of absolute fairness through absolute evil, and from what he saw of this Frieza character, he was just a bully who subjugated everyone under him. He wasn't fair, he wasn't what absolute evil was supposed to be. In order to change the balance of the world order and become the strongest monster on the planet, he had to surpass and defeat Frieza as well as that Saitama character. The only way he could do that was by becoming even stronger. Garu was gonna try to find more heroes and defeat them. If he was lucky, maybe one of the S-class heroes would be roaming around and he'd have the chance to take care of them. Yes, that would be the best way to go about it. Garu's malicious smile spread across his face. "I'll secure my place as this planet's strongest monster no matter what it takes." The Saiyan General Nappa soared through the sky, and within seconds, the building Nappa had broken out of came into view, and with his enormous speeds, it only took seconds for Nappa to arrive at the site. Once he arrived, he noticed Sonic controlling a very large and bright ball of Kai in his hand. Nappa couldn't help but smirk. Looked like the speedy prick was advancing rather far in his training. Sonic's head moved up when he heard a whooshing come closer to him, and it was Nappa. The bright orb of Kai vanished when Sonic's concentration broke. Nappa looked pretty banged up, and he had a scowl on his face. He'd felt several very large vibrations, which presumably originated from some sort of battle he was in. But for some reason, the vibrations became larger and larger as time passed, with the last one being enough to knock him off his feet and knock some of the wall structure loose. "You're back." Nappa landed in the hole and walked up to Sonic. "What the hell happened to you?" asked Sonic. Nappa slapped his hand over his eyes. "It's a long story. I had a monumental fight with my former boss, Frieza." Nappa grit his teeth once he finished the sentence, as if what he was about to say was extremely difficult. Sure enough, Sonic's assumption was correct. "He beat me, despite my best efforts. Another fighter came in, was defeated, and then Saitama." "Wait, what?" Sonic interrupted when he heard Saitama's name come up. "What about Saitama?" "He came in and fought Frieza in a one-on-one battle. Saitama held the upper hand for the majority of the battle. Unfortunately, Frieza underwent a massive transformation and defeated Sai." "What?" Sonic's mouth hung wide open, and he stepped back, for the shock was too great to bear. "Saitama defeated?" "No, that couldn't be. The only one who would have the honor of defeating Saitama was Sonic. Who the hell did this Frieza character think he was?" But more importantly, the idea that there was someone powerful enough to defeat Saitama was extremely unsettling. This Frieza must be a truly mighty foe indeed. Nappa could sense the shock and amazement Sonic was experiencing after hearing this news, and he completely understood where he was coming from. As shocking as it sounds, Frieza defeated Saitama despite his best efforts. He, alongside some of his hero friends, managed to escape with their lives. All of them should be in this building. "I see. So how much more powerful is this Frieza character compared to Saitama?" Nappa's head lowered downward. "The margin is significantly wide, and compared to me, as much as I hate to admit it, I'm just an ant, and he's a dinosaur. That's a pretty large margin." For a moment, both of them were silent, as they were too focused on what their next moves would be. For Nappa, he'd have to go through some massive training and somehow find a way to control and enhance the power of a Super Saiyan. And if he was lucky, he might reach a level beyond a Super Saiyan. But how would he do that? What kind of training would he have to do? Who would know the right training? Then it hit him, Saitama. He overheard Saitama talking with Frieza about some sort of training he did, and seeing the regular level of the indigenous people, he had to have gone through some sort of rigorous, unrelenting, torturous training to become as powerful as he was. Maybe if he picked up a few pointers from Saitama, he could become strong enough to challenge Frieza. But how would his associates handle his presence? He was an outlaw, a monster to the heroes in this society. If he tried to approach Saitama, they might attack him. Then again, they did witness Nappa fighting Frieza, the threat they'd been preparing to fight for quite some time, so that might buy some points for him. Besides, he could use his knowledge of Kai and teach all of them how to utilize their Kai to fly and fire energy blasts. Sure, it might be annoying to teach so many individuals at once, but if he could handle the speedy prick, he could handle anyone. Alright, I think I've got an idea. What we'll do is make a bargain and learn how Saitama became so powerful by training with him. And Sonic blatantly interrupted Nappa once again. Train with him? I'm not training with my sworn nemesis, shouted Sonic. I've spent all this time to beat Saitama, not work with him. Sonic, you have to understand, I don't know how he became so strong. We could spend the rest of our lives training with only the knowledge we have now, and not come even close to the level of power Saitama has now. And keep this in mind, there are others besides Saitama who are more powerful than you. For instance, your criminal friend is more powerful than you, and one of the other heroes has become even stronger than me through some sort of sudden modification. You don't have to talk to Saitama or anyone else, I'm not asking that of you. I'm just asking you to tolerate their presence. Once you think you've become strong enough, I urge you to challenge Saitama. Nappa held his finger up and pointed it at Sonic. Besides, remember rule number 1. Sonic's first response was a low growl, but he quickly stopped and sank down to the floor. Such a choice was something he despised making, but when it was the only choice, it appeared he'd have to give in. Sonic ran his hands through his hair and heaved a great sigh. Fine, let's go and find Saitama and his little pals. Sonic picked himself up from the ground. Do you know where they are? I can sense his energy in the building, replied Nappa. Follow me. Nappa walked to the wall, craned his hand back, and punched the wall, shattering it and creating another large hole. Saitama's waiting for us. All heroes, return to the Hero Association. I repeat, all heroes return to the Hero Association. At the Hero Association headquarters, things were nothing short of an absolute mess. Many of the staff members were receiving dozens, no hundreds of calls from distressed citizens, asking them where the S-class heroes had gone and why they weren't sending in more heroes. The staff members were doing the best they could to calm them down, but they themselves felt like bawling and hiding under their desks. At the same time, they were attempting to rein in as many heroes as they could back to the association. But so far, only about a dozen came back, one of those being Blizzard of Hell, as well as Ian, Bushidrill, and Akametachi. The staff members thought that the S-class heroes could handle the supposed god-level threat that arrived a few miles ahead of City A. But when they saw the heroes arrive with wounds all over their bodies, blood trailing over their clothes, they knew they'd failed. A quarter of the staff members actually fled the building and ran for their lives in every direction. Sitch himself felt like he was about to lose it. He just couldn't help it. Everything had gone to absolute, monumental, all-encompassing shit. Frieza defeated Saitama, humanity's last line of defense, and also left all of the S-class heroes battered and broken beyond fighting capability. In the laboratory, Sitch was there with Bafoy, Dr. Cusino, and Child Emperor, who were attempting to do damage control on this situation, but there wasn't much they could do. At the moment, the S-class heroes were quickly pacing through the hallway, going to Sitch to strategize and see what else could even be done. Then, running from across the hall in her high heels, the Blizzard of Hell and Atomic Samurai's 3 disciples ran across the hall, dirty and apparently weakened, although it was nothing in comparison to the damage the S-class heroes had suffered. Tatsumaki felt a small hint of relief in this dark hour, knowing that her sister managed to make it to safety, with the same applying to Atomic Samurai toward his disciples. Tatsumaki, Fubuki ran up to her older sister and slightly bent her knees, while Atomic Samurai's 3 disciples crowded around their master. Are you all right? What happened to you? Are you injured? Asked Ian, worrying over the significant blood spots and dirt all over him. None of his disciples had ever seen their master so beaten down. Fubuki looked up at the rest of the heroes. What happened to all of you? None of them even had the will nor the bravery to look her in the eye. Sis, nobody wants to talk about it. Her eyes gazed to Saitama, and she felt her heart drop to the floor. Saitama was defeated. Genos looked down to the ground, and with great sadness, gave a slow, singular nod of his head. Fubuki's hands covered her mouth. Oh my god. Come on, we have to go to see Sitch, demanded Sweet Mask, for he knew this wasn't the time to stand idle. And he sprinted across the hall, with the other heroes joining him a few seconds later. At Bafoy's laboratory, the front door opened up, revealing Sitch, Dr. Cusino, Child Emperor, and Bafoy working on the computers and surveying over each other. As soon as Sitch saw them, he went sprinting up, angrily searching for the one to blame for all of this, Saitama. Where is he? Shouted Sitch. Where's the bastard that allowed the Devil of Frost to power up to 100%? I'll finish that monster's job and kill him myself. Minister Sich. The voice came up on one of the monitors of Bafoy's lab, and Sich paced back to the monitors. Yes, what is it? We managed to find the location of Pig God, Drive Knight, Watchdog Man and Zombiman, and... The voice petered out as he was having a hard time actually finishing the sentence. Sich repeatedly banged the countertop and shouted, What? What is it? Pig God, Drive Knight and Watchdog Man have all been killed. Everyone in the room felt their blood run cold and their bodies freeze up. Was that correct? 3 S-class heroes were killed. We found the vaporized remains of Watchdog Man and Drive Knight, and Pig God's head had a large hole that went straight through his body. As for Zombiman, we saw a few of the alien soldiers carrying up in the sky. We're not sure what they intend to do with him. This can't be real. Sich felt his legs turn to jelly, and he slowly sunk down to the floor. As if things couldn't be any worse, then he had to hear this abysmal news. 3 S-class heroes, undoubtedly killed by Frieza, and the 4th one captured for God knows what reason. Sich slowly bent his back down and covered his eyes with his hands. This is a complete nightmare. Despite the momentary mourning of the 3 S-class heroes, Genos knew that now was not the time for that, however harsh it may have sounded, for there were more immediate problems to address. Genos walked to the front of the crowd, with his master in his arms. We need to evacuate. Sich's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? They have several scouters that can track our energy levels, and with high energies such as ours, they will locate us in no time flat. The other S-class heroes recoiled when this fact hit them. They were in barely any condition to do more running. But where will we go? Said Atomic Samurai. With that kind of technology, they could track us anywhere across the planet. That's right, said Superalloy Darkshine. All Frieza needs is our location, and he'll kill us all. What the fuck are we gonna do? Said Metal Bat. We're so dead. Stop. Everybody's voices felt flat when Dr. Cusino yelled out. The good doctor, having gotten everyone's attention, walked to the center of the room and placed his hands on the countertop. There's another solution. What do you mean, doctor? What solution? Asked Genos. You see, while I was studying the scouter technology, I did some research on exactly how it is that they detect the energy levels, and I discovered something. What I learned is that every being has internal energy, a 4th state of matter that flows throughout their body, and this energy flows out of us. When it does, it releases waves, electromagnetic waves, similar to radio signals and gamma rays, and depending on how powerful a person is, more of these waves will be released. Using what we know about the properties of electromagnetic waves and the electromagnetic spectrum, I realized some key things. 1. Like regular waves, it becomes increasingly difficult for the waves to be detected the further underground a source is. 2. If the waves are blocked by materials that are used to block electromagnetic waves, such as thick lead lining, or perhaps use an advanced scrambling system, then the scouter will be unable to track the energy waves. Dr. Cusino turned to Sich. Does this headquarters have an underground bunker or lair? We had a bunker built in the worst-case scenario of a monster invasion or god-level threat as such when the Hero Association was first formed. Not only is there food and supplies to last for several months, but there is also a large training area built in hopes of training heroes to become strong enough to defeat said monsters. Well, isn't that convenient? Muttered Tatsumaki. I haven't been able to create a device that masks or intercepts the energy waves just yet, but for now, the best course of action would be to hide underground. Dr. Cusino heaved a great sigh of distress. I'm sorry things have become forlorn. I'll try to help in any way I can. Thank you, said Sich, his voice barely above a whisper. Come on everyone, I'll go show you the hatch to the bunker. Sich softly nudged his way through the crowd of heroes, with his head down and his eyes blackened with darkness and despair. He went through the hall at a jogging pace when his run came to a screeching halt. The other heroes stopped, and gave each other confused looks as to why he stopped so abruptly, when their answer came upon looking up. Standing at the end of the hall was the same warrior who fought Frieza before Genos, along with a young companion standing besides him. It's you, shouted Genos. The rest of the heroes scrunched their faces and took fighting positions. Take it easy. Nappa slowly placed his hands up. The Saiyan general repeatedly tapped Sonic's leg with his foot and gave him a sharp glance. Sonic grumbled, but lifted his hands up into the air as well. Nappa knew this probably wasn't gonna work, but he had to try anyway. Look, I know we got off on the wrong foot, and I know that I might have hurt a few of your guys, said Nappa, but I have a proposition for you. Proposition, shouted Sich. Why would we listen to any proposition of yours? You attempted to eliminate both myself and Saitama, followed Genos, you and your short associate. Look, I only came here because my former boss ordered me to, and I'm not working for him anymore. You all saw that yourselves. He's right. King took the initiative and walked up to front of the crowd of heroes. When all of you were unconscious, Frieza revealed to me that he annihilated his home planet in fear of the emergence of the legend of the Super Saiyan. For 25 years, he deceived the Saiyans by convincing them a giant meteor destroyed his home planet. He only worked for Frieza because he had no choice. That's right, replied Nappa. Besides, if I really wanted to eliminate all of you, I would have done it already with only a single energy blast. You've seen my power yourselves, you know I could. Look, we all have a common enemy. I want that repulsive reptile dead as much as you do. And I can offer you something extremely beneficial. A benefit. This served to pique the interests of several of the heroes, and most of them relaxed their fighting stances. And what would that be? Questioned Genos. I can teach you all how to fly and fire energy blasts just as I can. All of the heroes were taken aback by this, and each of them stared at each other quizzically. King was the first to speak up. What do you mean? Look, all of you have internal energy within you. You all have the power to fly and shoot energy blasts just like I can. And with your strength, the speed at which you fly and the intensity of your energy blasts will be extraordinary. Also, I can teach you how to better utilize your internal energy and improve your battle performance. While most of the heroes seemed to take a liking to this idea, Sitch's face didn't soften. I'm not buying it, said Sitch. I think this is all some sort of ruse to root us out to your leader. It all just seems too convenient. And what about him? Sitch pointed his finger to Sonic. He's a wanted criminal. I bet that he'll attempt to slit our throats the minute he sees our guard is down. Why would I trust him? Or you? Because you really don't have too much of a choice, and you don't have to worry about this speedy prick doing anything rash. I'll keep him in check. Sitch tried to retort, but found nothing to retort with. Granted, Demon Cyborg could probably take care of him, but he would take down several S-class heroes in the process, and they couldn't deal with such losses. Sitch. King turned around and stared Sitch straight in the eyes. We need him. Sitch stared in awe at King for a few moments, and then sighed. All right. Sitch ran his hand through his hair and stretched his back out so that he was staring at the sky. If the strongest man in the world says we should, then I'll take his word for it. Yes, the strongest man in the world. Genos quietly spoke and gave King an icy glare. King felt an alarm go off in his brain. Why was Genos staring at him like that? Before he had the time to ponder a reasonable answer, Sitch motioned for everyone to follow him, including Nappa and Sonic. With 2 extra members of this group, they all paced down about 3 flights of dimly lit stairs until he reached the bottom of the staircase, where there was a room with several large boilers and pipes leading up to the rest of the building. He then went to the far right corner, where there was another large boiler. Sitch began to touch the boiler's edge, until he felt a small ridge with a small button. He pushed the button, and a square panel popped out of the boiler. He put his hand on the panel, and after it scanned his fingerprints, the boiler opened up, revealing a hole with a steel ladder. Come on, everyone move. One by one, they entered the small opening and slid down the ladder. While sliding down, Genos was careful with his master's body and kept him slung over his shoulders. Once the first heroes made it down to the bottom of the room, they were met with absolute darkness. They couldn't even tell how big the room was due to the blackness. Allow me. Nappa paced a few steps in front of the other heroes and opened his palm. The Saiyan general formed a bright ball of energy in his palm, growing it to the size of a large boulder, and pushed it up to the center of the room. With the ball of energy serving as a light source, they could see that there were at least 4 different rooms. The room they were in was rather small, but the room in front of them was very expansive, filled with several punching dummies, targets, and in the center, a combat ring presumably designed for one-on-one sparring. In the other rooms, there were boxes filled with packaged food and drinks, and in the other, there were several beds. Shortly afterwards, the last 2 individuals, King and Sitch, came down the ladders. Allow me to activate the generators to turn the lights on. Sitch walked to the end of the room, where there was a panel none of the others had noticed before. He owned the panel and flicked on all of the switches. In an instant, several of the lights hanging on the wall burst to life, illuminating the room even more than it already was, causing some of the heroes to close their eyes. Guess we don't need that anymore, said Nappa, closing his fist and dissipating the energy sphere. We don't have any time to waste, said Sweet Mask. We should start whatever training is necessary immediately. And hold on, Sweet Mask. Genos interrupted the A-class hero and gave another cold look at King. There's something that I've been meaning to discuss. King shifted nervously in his place. There it was again, that distrusting look in the cyborg's eyes. He'd been giving those quite frequently ever since his upgrade. What do you want to discuss, Genos? Said King, keeping a cool tone of voice. Something is off about you, King. Ever since I acquired my new body, I'm now able to read the precise energy readings of every living being. And according to my sensors, your energy level is only 2. From what I've seen, that's lower than the average C-class hero. Everyone felt this massive twist spin their heads around. Genos continued, at first, I thought it was merely a glitch in the system. But after seeing that you never did battle against Frieza, it made more sense. Some of the other heroes began to murmur to one another. Many of them also had growing doubts of King's decisions, his lack of action making less and less sense throughout the battle against Frieza. But could it really be true? King was the man. He had the highest ranking of the Hero Association, and his reputation was legendary. The idea that such an intimidating man who bordered on godliness, who killed several demon and dragon-level monsters single-handedly, was mind-blowing, even with the world-shaking events that transpired today. Dude, just come clean. The voice was dispassionate and neutral, it belonged to only one person. Everyone turned their bodies, and sure enough, Saitama, the hero who completely and utterly screwed the S-class heroes and the entire planet, was standing up, staring at King with his hands drooping down lifelessly. The next few seconds were absolute chaos, and all of the attention drawn towards King was completely forgotten. Most of the heroes began shouting derisively at the bald hero, and a few of them actually lunged at him and pinned him to the ground, specifically Sweet Mask and Sitch. Sitch stared down at Saitama with absolute fury. What have you done? Screamed Sitch. You were supposed to take care of that monster. I trusted you. I promoted you to S-class upon realizing my grave mistake. I apologized. And how did you repay my generosity? By dooming not only the Hero Association, but mankind itself. That's right, continued Sweet Mask. Who knows what unspeakable atrocities Frieza will commit on the people of Earth. He'll most likely enslave them, subjugate them and force them under a new tyrannical system of government. And we're powerless to stop him, because of your failures. Instead of attempting to argue against them, pushing them off of him, telling them to calm down and get off of him, he just laid on the ground absolutely motionless. But there was another key difference. Unlike his typical appearance of blank eyes and derpy face, his face was now changed into his more serious expression. The fiery passion in his eyes during his battle with Frieza was snuffed out. The way Frieza sadistically toyed with him and crushed the spirits of someone as strong-willed as Saitama was daunting. Saitama's lips were pulled down, his eyelids were drooped down, and all the muscles in his body were drained of energy. It was as if they were looking at his corpse. Release Saitama. Genos grabbed their shoulders with both of his arms and pulled them back, and the teenage cyborg shot in front of his master, taking a defensive stance in the process. I fully understand the mistakes my master has made, as well as the anger directed toward him, but now is not the time for fighting. We have enough issues to deal with, and further division is the last thing we need. Genos waved his hands out to the others and momentarily took the mantle of leadership to reason the other heroes into. We need to focus all of our effort on training. This is the only way we hope of standing up to Frieza. Luckily, with my master here and... Genos momentarily paused his sentence and motioned his hand toward Nappa, rather uncomfortable motioning to him, and continued his sentence with an aggravated and more hostile tone. And with his knowledge about energy, we could further accelerate the rate of our training. Master Saitama, if we can get started right away. No, Saitama blatantly interrupted his disciple. All of the heroes had a hard time believing how rudely Saitama interrupted him and the instant rejection of this alternative plan. What the hell was wrong with him? Saitama, what the hell? Said Nappa, what's the matter with you? Saitama didn't even finish his sentence before storming off to the room with all of the beds, pacing off to be alone and lament his horrendous failure. Master, Genos felt his heart sink. He had never seen his master this saddened before. The gravity of this defeat must have sunken down to his very soul. While Genos and Nappa looked on with worried faces, Sitch walked up to the center of the horde of heroes. Alright, all of you rest up for now. After getting some sleep and allowing your bodies to heal, we'll have a more in-depth discussion of our future plans. Until then, just sit tight and wait for further instructions. Seeing as how Sitch was right, all of the heroes reluctantly dispersed, also having completely forgotten and disregarded the cyborg's statements about King due to the other problems on hand, slowly walking away to their own little corners to cope with their loss and grieve in their own way. The Saiyan general walked up to Genos, who stepped back upon sensing Nappa's close proximity to him. Saitama's not looking good, said Nappa, stating the obvious. My master is simply feeling the sadness accompanied with his loss to Frieza, said Genos. We need to talk to him, you and me. He needs to see your familiar face, and I think I can manage to get a few words out of him. We have to get him out of this funk for all our sakes. The teenage cyborg momentarily clenched his fists, but conceded to Nappa's words. With the world coming to an end, it needed a man like Saitama. It couldn't survive without him. Very well, muttered Genos, let us go. Saitama was not the only hero who was wallowing in grief and shame. In fact, nearly all of the heroes were reciprocating these despondent emotions. Although it was to a less extreme level, they'd all failed in their own ways, and it was taking its toll on them. The 3 disciples of the most powerful swordsman on the planet were huddled around their master, who was crouched on the floor with his knees opened with his head hanging in between them. He had his katana on top of his knees and was slowly rubbing his fingers over the edge of the blade repeatedly, the motion giving him some form of comfort. The 3 disciples felt worry gnaw at them, and they gave one another wary looks of unease. They'd never seen their master like this before. The bright atomic glow of his blade was now a dull gray. The calm, collected, and supremely confident master they were familiar with had utterly vanished. Master, what is the matter? Asked the Ion. I lost, muttered Atomic Samurai under his breath, causing a wave of shock to run through the hearts of his disciples. To them, it was more than just the loss, granted. Hearing about the S-class heroes being defeated presumably meant that their master had been defeated as well. But to hear it from Kamikaze himself only made it more shocking, especially knowing that it could have dealt this big a blow to his pride. What? Said Okametachi, how could that have happened? That monster, he was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Atomic Samurai's voice was dispatched and morose, as if verbally recounting this was causing him pain. He was able to suppress his power in multiple stages, and even in his most suppressed state, he was able to expertly dodge my atomic slash with only minor difficulty. You mean he was able to react to 100 slashes in a single second? Exclaimed Bushido. Atomic Samurai slowly nodded. The swordsman continued. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. The gap between that monster and I, it's too big. Even if I train for 3 lifetimes, I don't think I'll be able to close that gap. No, shouted Ion, it's impossible. There can't be a monster that's strong. Atomic Samurai shook his head. After what I've seen today, nothing is impossible. Today, I was shown that in the end, Kamikaze's stomach churned and revolted at what he was about to say because the truth hurt. I am a weakling. Master, no. Ion frantically shook his head. You're not. The evidence is before me, interrupted Kamikaze, who lowered his head back to look at the ground. In the end, I'm one of the weak. The strongest Esper on planet Earth was standing in pain in the main lounge area. Her green, curly hair was disheveled and partly burnt off from the repeated battles against Frieza. A stream of blood ran down the right side of her forehead. Her black dress had several holes and tears with blood spots and bruises, and her right sleeve had been completely torn off. Hey sis, walking toward her sister with a bottle of water in her right hand and several bandages and wipes in her left hand was her younger sister. Here you go sis. Fubuki handed her sister the bottle of water and she immediately grabbed the bottle to gulp down the water. Now let me just. Fubuki took one of the wipes and began to wipe off the blood stains. Tatsumaki swatted her sister's hands off of her. God, I'm not a baby, said Tatsumaki. I know, but look at you. At least let me. Fubuki wiped the blood off of her face and quickly withdrew her hands. Once she finished the water bottle, she crushed it with her psychic powers and threw it to the corner of the room. Fubuki placed the bandages to her side and moved herself to the right of her older sister. They didn't really know what to say to one another since they'd never been good with chit-chat, and Tatsumaki was in less of a mood for conversation than usual. After a few moments of silence, Fubuki decided to break the ice and came out with a straightforward comment. I've never seen you take such a beating in my life. Tatsumaki let out a harsh breath and blew out of his cheeks, because it's never happened before. That lizard's lucky. Tatsumaki jerked her head toward her little sister and held up a finger. If I'd have been at full strength, I would have beaten that little punk in 5 seconds flat. Fubuki slapped her hand over her eye, causing Tatsumaki to shoot her sister a confused look. What's that supposed to mean? Said Tatsumaki. You should know very well what it means. Fubuki hunched her shoulders and put her hands to her sides. Look at where we are. Look at what happened. I sense the entire planet shaking from the battle between Saitama and this devil of frost. You're really telling me that you can stand up to a being whose power has the ability to destroy the entire planet? Tatsumaki opened her mouth to retort, but all that came out were a series of stutters and mumbles which only served to prove her younger sister's point. Fubuki understood why her sister couldn't come to terms with this. Ever since she was a kid, everybody revered her. She was the popular girl, the celebrity everybody adored. In her eyes, the entire world revolved around her. Well, truth be told, the only reason people idolized her was because they were afraid of her powers, but Fubuki would never tell her sister that. To make this problem even worse, her enormous psychic powers made it so even the strongest mysterious beings that showed up could never pose a serious threat to her. But today, for the first time ever, she knew what it felt like to lose. She knew what it felt like to be inferior. In a way, Tatsumaki could perhaps get a glimpse of how Fubuki felt. Alas, Fubuki's feelings about this were irrelevant. What was relevant was snapping her sister out of her prideful state and getting her to work together with the others. This was the only way they'd be able to defeat Frieza. Standing at the edge of the room with his back against the wall was Speedo Sound Sonic. His eyes were at the ground, refusing to even look at any of the heroes when he didn't need to. Hopefully, none of them would get any funny ideas. He had no interest in getting to know any of these heroes. Most of all, he refused to even be in the same presence as Tudo. Sonic's teeth clenched together when he heard that voice. Slowly pacing up to Sonic was Flashy Flash, whose lips were formed into a scowl and his eyebrows were perched downward. When Sonic looked up, his eyes nominally widened. He actually looked sad, yet he quickly masked his surprise and gave Flash a cold stare. Is there something I can do you, just to make sure I don't do it? Mocked Sonic. Flashy Flash didn't scowl at Sonic's rudeness towards him. He didn't have the pride or confidence to fight back. Kazuki, Flashy Flash felt the words stick in his throat. It was never like him to feel such sorrow and weakness, but like several of the other heroes, he'd never been so utterly dominated. Ever since he underwent his intense training, he thought everything would change. He thought that he'd trained himself to the maximum level possible, the highest level of power that only a select few in the world could ever hope to achieve. But in an instant, his beliefs were proven wrong. Like the rest of the heroes, not only was he knocked out by that birder character in a stalemate, but he was absolutely pulverized by Frieza, who was using only a fraction of his full power, and was defeated with only a single blow. He'd never felt so helpless, so afraid. The only other time he'd experienced this kind of fear was when Flashy Flash's brows furrowed downward. There was only one person in this world who'd ever seen him so vulnerable. The only person who'd been there when the village had been annihilated by that monster. The only person who also experienced that feeling of helplessness, knowing that even with all of his powers, he could do nothing but watch as innocent people were being slaughtered. That person was standing right next to him, but unfortunately, that person loathed him with every fiber of his being. And Flashy Flash didn't know how to change that. Kazuki was just too stubborn. It was something they shared. The weight of his loss and all of the emotions swirling inside finally caught with him, and the control on his legs weakened. The ninja hero slowly slid his back against the wall, while letting his arms droop to the sides. It took a moment for him to come back to his senses. He looked Sonic in the eyes and muttered, "I'm sorry." Upon hearing those words, Sonic's eyes softened, and his arms became uncrossed. Flashy Flash continued, "I never meant for our village to be destroyed. I just wanted to prove myself. I wanted to prove to the rest of our village that I was a true hero, a warrior who could handle even the toughest opponents by myself. I thought I'd learned my lesson. I thought my intense, bone-breaking training would be enough to handle the mightiest monsters. I thought I would never face another experience like the one at the village. And yet, you were powerless." Sonic blatantly interrupted Flashy Flash. Sonic scowled, his rougher demeanor surfacing again. "You were powerless to do anything against a truly powerful opponent. As I told you before, heroes can never protect anyone or defend anything. And now, it's not just the people of our village who've suffered this time. Every soul on the planet has to pay the price for your weakness and the rest of your pals." Sonic spit out the last word with venom, causing the ninja hero's fists to clench up and his eyebrows to furrow. How could Kazuki say such terrible things while seeing him so weak? He expected him to at least stay silent and respect his openness, but he was just throwing this right back at his face. "Well, if that was how he wanted it, two could play that game, of course. That's your response," replied Flashy Flash with a low, aggravated voice. "What more did I expect from an assassin such as yourself?" Sonic glared daggers at Flashy Flash. "What's that supposed to mean? All you care about is money. You don't care who you kill or what they've done. As long as you're paid, it's irrelevant. Your greed has consumed you, robbing you of any morals you once had." Flashy Flash straightened his back and coldly said, "With enough money, I'm sure you would have even killed our master." Sonic felt every muscle in his body tense. For a moment, he stared at Flashy Flash. The ninja hero's stern gaze softened, and he was taken aback by the whirlwind of emotions flashing in Sonic's eyes. The first thing he could see was hurt. Flashy Flash took it too far. Kazuki, I didn't. Sonic was able to take Flashy Flash by surprise and immediately pinned Flashy Flash against the wall, lifting him a few inches off the floor. His elbow pressed against Kudo's neck, and his other hand was holding a small knife against his throat. Sonic's nostrils were flaring, and his body was trembling with rage. Flashy Flash couldn't help but be shocked by this unbridled rage. Flashy Flash expected Sonic to explode, but instead, Sonic spoke in a very low, soft voice, but there was no mistaking that he was beyond furious. "You have no idea what I feel," said Sonic, pressing the knife even deeper into his neck, drawing a pinprick of blood. "And if you ever say anything like that again, I'll make sure that this knife goes all the way through your throat." The two stayed silent for a moment, waiting for the other to make a move, seeing whether they'd fight back and trying to see how each of them were feeling. Then, after this long standstill, Sonic released his grip on Flashy Flash. The ninja assassin gave his former friend one last look before shoving his fists into his pockets and walking off to search for another place of solitude. Like all the other heroes, the highest-ranking hero in a class was having some rather troubling thoughts of his own. He was the very first combatant to demonstrate his abilities, and he was instantly rendered immobile by Zarbon's ugliness. He hadn't even taken any serious damage from the fighter, he was just unable to fight back. The A-class hero slapped his hand against his forehead. What an embarrassment. And then, when all of the heroes combined their might against Frieza, he was powerless in the face of that ugly lizard's overwhelming power. Despite his grotesque appearances, each of his transformations granted him an explosive growth and power. It was unbelievable. Sweet Mask rested his back against the wall. He craned his head up and stared blankly at the ceiling. "It's more than that," whispered Sweet Mask. For him, perhaps the most shocking of all was Saitama's power. When Sweet Mask first saw his hero application, his very first thought was of his bald head and unappealing appearance. He'd completely disregarded his perfect score on the physical exams and has allowed him to be placed in the lowest rank of the lowest class, and every time he saw his name in the news and the way he assisted in defeating demon and dragon-level mysterious beings by landing the final blow, he was certain Saitama was merely lucky, and that the S-class heroes had done all of the major damage. Sweet Mask let out a sardonic chuckle. How wrong was I? Even though Saitama had lost, and even though he's been recklessly irresponsible, he was able to outmaneuver and overpower Frieza in his final form with minimal effort. He far surpassed the power he or any other S-class hero possessed, and however much he hated to admit it, he was most likely the best chance the heroes had at defeating Frieza. Sweet Mask sighed. He now wished he could go back in time and shoot Saitama all the way to S-class rank 1. It was only now that he realized that Saitama did indeed have beauty, a beauty that far eclipsed his own. Saitama had the beauty of overwhelming power. I have to obtain it. Sweet Mask clenched his fists and intensely whispered, I have to obtain that overwhelming beauty somehow. Genos and Nappa walked over to calm Saitama down, but they weren't exactly sure what to say. It was obvious that Saitama was feeling like absolute garbage, and if they were being honest, everybody would agree with that statement. The most they could do was try to ease his mind, but it wouldn't be easy. When they entered the room, they found that Saitama wasn't in any of the beds. They peered over the rows of beds, trying to see where he could be hiding. After gazing over the 10th row of beds, Genos saw his master sitting in the corner, his face buried in his hands and his back curved downward like a sleeping infant as he curled up in shame. The guilt tormented him endlessly, gnawing at his insides and making him sick to his stomach. Genos softly walked up to Saitama and tapped him lightly on the shoulder. Master, the bald hero didn't bother meeting his disciple's gaze. Go away, Genos. Master, we need your assistance. Genos put his hand on Saitama's left shoulder in an attempt to comfort him. If humanity is to survive, all of us need your guidance, your unimaginable power. It's the only thing that can stand up to Frieza. I said go away, Genos. Saitama's face finally left his palms and he shot an angry look at Genos and Nappa, who was standing right behind the cyborg. When he saw Nappa though, his eyebrow furrowed up. He hadn't noticed Nappa before when he'd first woken up, so this was new to him. Nappa was freed. How did that happen? Did that mean he was on their side? What are you doing here with Genos and the rest of the heroes? I'm here to offer up my services and to help defeat our common enemy, replied Nappa. And in order to do that, we're gonna need your support. We're gonna need your power. My power meant jack shit in the end, yelled Saitama. You both saw it. And I let it happen. Everyone told me to take him out when I could, but I didn't listen. I thought that his power-up would only be enough to break a sweat, but it turns out his power-up was enough to break me. I understand that completely, Master, but no one could have anticipated such a large change. It's not as if you knew his power-up would be that large. Genos attempted to underscore the severity of Saitama's mistake as a means to put him at ease, but he could see it wasn't working, as he appeared just as despondent, if not more. But this was just one mistake. In a sudden twist, Saitama shot up from his seated position and shot daggers at his disciple, causing him to back away in fear. "No, it isn't. Can't you see? This is about more than my battle with Frieza." "Huh?" uttered the cyborg. Genos didn't understand where Saitama was coming from. "What do you mean?" Saitama let out a pain-riddled sigh, rubbing his hands through his face and head. After he'd regained his consciousness, a swirling, volatile vortex of unstable emotions were overflowing in Saitama's heart, threatening to burst it open into millions of pieces. The first obvious sensation he felt was guilt and shame of his ridiculous stupidity in allowing Frieza to reach 100%. He acted recklessly and selfishly, only caring about getting the rush of excitement from a real fight, and everyone on the planet was paying the price for it. But the guilt made him come to a realization about something else, something that he never considered or thought about until now that was racking his brain. This battle and my major fuck-up made me realize how terrible of a hero I've really been. Genos cut his hand through the air. "That's nonsense," said Genos. "You're the most powerful hero on this planet." "Yea, and how have I used that power?" The bald hero's arms drooped to his sides. "How many times have I been late to the fight after other heroes have been sadistically toyed with?" "Every single time." "How many lives were lost in the time it took me to get there, even though I could have made it to the destination in no time flat?" "I've treated it all like it was nothing, going at whatever time I pleased and never considering working out a strategy or finding a way to minimize damage. Take that giant monster who attacked D-City. I ended it with a single punch, but his body crushed dozens of buildings filled with God knows how many people that died. I could have punched him back with enough force to move his body out of the city and avoid any fatalities. But no, I didn't give a freaking thought to it. And now, my stupidities put every person on the planet at risk. I don't deserve your admiration, Genos. I don't deserve my S-class ranking. I don't even deserve to be called a hero." Saitama slammed his fist on the bed, splitting it in two and creating a crevice in the ground from the force of his blow. The bald hero's momentary rage fleeted after releasing his anger with his punch, and despondency took over once more, rendering all of his muscles useless and causing him to slump down onto the broken bed. "I'm nothing." Genos somberly lowered his head down. The despondency and guilt appeared to have taken his master over completely, clouding his vision and judgment with only negative thoughts. It was like Saitama was a completely different person. He didn't even recognize him anymore. What could Genos say? How could he fix this? "No, you're not." Saitama and Genos turned their heads up when they realized it was Nappa who spoke up. "That's a lie." Nappa rotated his body around and took a seat in the bed. Nappa wouldn't allow Saitama to talk about himself this way. He was one of the most honorable and strong-willed fighters he'd ever come across in his lifetime, and Saitama needed to know that. "Look, I'm not gonna bullshit you. What you said sounds pretty bad, and you may very well be right about the citizens that were inadvertently killed by you." Saitama's head lowered, and Genos aggravatingly shoved Nappa's shoulder. "What are you saying?" snarled Genos. Nappa held his hand up to the cyborg's face. "I wasn't done yet," replied Nappa, "and I'm a straightforward guy. Now Saitama." Saitama didn't meet Nappa's eyes. "Look at me." Not willing to have any of this self-pitying bullcrap, Nappa grabbed Saitama's head and forced him to stare him straight in the eyes. After silently gazing for a moment, Nappa let go of his grip on Saitama and quietly asked him a question. "Let me ask you something. While you're thinking of all the people that might have been inadvertently hurt or even killed by your actions, try and think about all of the lives you've saved through your heroic acts. How many people would have been killed if you never showed up to fight any of those monsters? How many cities would have been reduced to rubble? How many children are still getting to live their lives because they weren't killed by the monsters attacking their homes? For God's sake, it weren't for you, this planet would be a floating pile of space rocks destroyed by burrows long ago." As Genos was listening to Nappa speak, his face began to light up. Nappa's words of inspiration were actually inspiring. Saitama's dampened expression was starting to nominally lighten up. Nappa's lips pursed, and his eyebrows narrowed. "You may not believe in your strength, but I believe in it, and so does your disciple." "That's right," interjected Genos. "You are strong, undeniably strong." Genos joined the two bald warriors and sat to the left of Saitama. "I do not care what anyone else says. You've saved this planet countless times, and millions of people are still alive because of you. I can give you countless examples of how your actions have saved lives. Genos held out his hand and began counting with his fingers. When you defeated the Deep Sea King and saved that entire shelter of civilians. When you destroyed the meteorite and prevented not only Zisi, but several other cities as well from being obliterated. And just as Nappa said moments ago, when you prevented Burrows from destroying the entire planet and saving every civilian on Earth. Genos jabbed his finger at his chest repeatedly. I am alive because of you. You saved my life not once, but twice. You've allowed me to continue walking on this planet and work as a server of justice. You need to understand that. Saitama's blackened heart was lit by the shining hope illuminating from the cyborg's faith in him. What they said was indeed true. He did do all those things and he did save all those people. Maybe it was wrong of him on only look at the bad things he'd done. Saitama reached his hand out and patted Genos on the back, compassionately smiling at him as well. Thanks, Genos. That means a lot to me. Nappa took control of the conversation again. Through your training and monstrously hot willpower, you managed to achieve a level of power far greater than me, a Super Saiyan, and anyone else on this planet. With only a punch, you could destroy an entire planet. So don't go telling me that you're nothing. Yeah, but your decision to let Frieza power up may have been wrong. And as bad as it might be to admit it, the lives of civilians may be in jeopardy. That much is painfully obvious. Saitama's lips pursed downward. Nappa saw this and sliced his hand through the air. But sitting here and sulking about it isn't going to help you or any of us. If anything, every moment you waste here is a moment the people of your planet are being subjugated by Frieza, enslaved to his new tyrannical system of government and forced to live under his icy cold iron fist. Based on how I've seen him take over, he won't go out of his way to kill civilians. He'll force them under his new system of government and most likely show a sample of his power to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Hopefully, people will be smart enough to lay low for now while we figure out how to kill Frieza. But every day we don't do anything is another day where your people will be forced to work under that slimy lizard. Now, are you willing to let that happen? As you just said before, are you willing to let innocent civilians pay the price for your mistakes? Or are you going to get off of this bed and work yourself so hard? Frieza's new form will seem like a cute party trick. Something in Nappa's words managed to change something huge in Saitama. It was like a circuit in the bald hero's brain that had been disconnected suddenly clicked back into place, restoring the system that was Saitama's will and soul to full working order and reinvigorating him with the fiery willpower that gave him his strength. Nappa was absolutely right. It was now his responsibility to become even stronger than he was, as well as help the other heroes to attain even greater strength in the hopes of standing up to that monster Frieza. He made the choice to let Frieza reach full power, and this was the price he'd have to pay, no ifs, ands, or buts. Saitama slapped his hands onto his thighs. Well, I guess I can't be mopping around then. Saitama slowly jumped off of the bed and heaved a sigh. If I do that, then Frieza wins. Saitama's pulse slammed in his neck, and I'd rather shove crap in hell while sucking the devil off than see that slimy lizard win again. Nappa's face split into a wide smile, as well as Genos' face. Exactly, exclaimed Nappa, taken up in the new dedication shown by Saitama. The Saiyan general clapped his hands, and proceeded to wrap his arm around Saitama's shoulder and fiercely shake him. That's the Saitama we're all counting on. Saitama nervously chuckled and slowly released himself from Nappa's grip. Saitama's resolve was now clear. Nappa and Genos were right. Saitama couldn't afford to waste time. He owed it to everyone to make up for his mistake. The pain of his stupidity was still hurting him. It was still clawing at his heart and threatening to make it explode. But if there was one thing Saitama was exceptionally good at, it was suppressing pain. And everyone out there needed Saitama's expertise in training and pushing limits now more than ever. Time for a training montage, shouted Saitama. The chamber underneath the Hero Association was quiet and somber, the heroes still mourning their losses in their respective ways. Suddenly, the chamber slowly came back to life when the rapid footsteps of three individuals echoed through the room. Saitama, Genos, and Nappa made their way to the center of the room. Once they positioned themselves, Saitama took one step forward, raised his hands, and shouted, "Everyone, can I have your attention please?" All of the people in their room lifted their heads up to acknowledge the hero. Seeing that he'd gotten their attention, Saitama continued, "I know you guys are pissed off at me. I'm pissed off at me too. But if it isn't too much trouble, I'd like for you all to gather around me for a meeting. I think you all need to hear this." At first, some of the heroes simply gave him icy stares and looked back to the floor, while others only started getting up at a very slow pace. But then, Sitch paced up to the center, just a few feet in front of Saitama, and boomed, "You heard him. Stop moping on the floor and listen to what he has to say." Even though Sitch was still upset at Saitama, He still knew Saitama was a key asset in reclaiming Earth, and if Saitama felt it necessary enough to gather everyone, then it had to be important. That's an order. Seeing that their superior was very serious, the rest of the heroes got up and slowly walked up to Saitama, forming a semicircle around him, while Sonic stayed a few feet back, away from the crowd. "Thanks, Sich," said Saitama. However, Sich gave Saitama a cold look and clapped his fingers together. "Zip it," barked Sich. "I'm still angry with you." The bald hero let out a heavy sigh. I know. Sich didn't give Saitama an inch of pity. Well then, out with it. Sich didn't want any dilly-dallying from Saitama. Alright. Saitama had the floor. The room was once again silent. All of these broken, morose, and hopeless souls were looking at him, some of them infuriated with him, some of them pitying him, yet all of them were still here to listen to him. He had to try and infuse them with some sort of hope, a kickstart to get them working again. It was his responsibility. Saitama took a deep breath in and calmly exhaled. Well, here goes. First of all, I want all of you to know that I'm sorry for what happened. The crowd didn't waver. Saitama continued. I know my apology probably doesn't mean much to any of you, but I still want everyone to understand that this was never my intention. I've been going through an existential crisis, and I thought letting Frieza power up was the best thing to do. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't consider how many lives I was putting at risk through my actions. I didn't think about how all of you were counting on me to defeat Frieza. I was only thinking about myself. Today, my actions weren't the actions of a hero. They were the actions of a selfish man. It's only now, through my defeat, that I'm able to truly understand that. The faces of some of the spectators began to soften. I don't really know any of you. I don't know what kind of people you are on the insides, what you think of your others, or what you think of yourselves, but right now, you've got to put that aside. From what I've seen, I'm quite sure most of you take too much pride in your abilities. You probably thought you could handle most monsters by yourself, and a lot of your peers weren't nearly as strong as you. I can understand that. You're in S-class for a reason. You all persevered in your own ways, and you're able to handle the threats that most other heroes can't. But, given how battered you are, I'd say you learned that your abilities paled in the face of Frieza's might. That applies to me more than anyone else here. I've realized that I still have a lot to learn, and that's where you all come in. As I said, all of you are prodigies. All of you possess strength, knowledge, and abilities that have helped you reach this far. Nappa took a step forward and interrupted Saitama. That's right. Just as I told you before, I can teach all of you how to use your internal energy to fly and unleash Kai blasts. And Saitama can teach all of us how he obtained such an explosive growth and power. But the only way this'll work is if we cooperate. The heroes gave each other empty stares, since most of them, like Saitama, barely knew one another nor ever had any interest in interacting with each other. Saitama let out a small groan. They weren't making this easy. Look, this is the first god-level threat our planet has faced. We need to put our pride aside. For once, we need to stop thinking of ourselves and protect as many people as we can, like what real heroes do. Please, we have to do this. The eyes of the heroes softened, and they tucked their heads down to the floor, pondering everything Saitama had just said. But then, one of the heroes walked up to the center of the crowd, and that hero was Metal Bat. Hold up. I'm not doing anything until my sister and my cat are brought here safe and sound. Saitama's eyes momentarily widened. Where are they now? Well, right now they should both be at our home waiting until this whole thing blows over. But now that I know this problem's gonna keep on going for weeks, maybe even months, there's no way I'm leaving them unprotected. Bofway decided to interject. Don't be foolish. With all of the foot soldiers swarming up there with their scouters, you'll be spotted in an instant. It's too dangerous, especially with that Frieza character roaming about. Metal Bat bared his teeth at Bofway with frightening malice, causing the aged scientist to jump back. Shut up, old man, yelled Metal Bat. Until they're brought here safe and sound, I ain't working with anybody here. So if nobody has the decency to help me, I'll just go up there myself and hope for the best. No. Saitama grasped Metal Bat's shoulder and gazed at him intensely. I can't have you going up there without any sort of plan. I can understand your concern, but if we're gonna rescue those two, it's gonna take a little bit of strategy. Does anyone have any ideas on how to go up there and find those two without being spotted? The heroes tried to come up with a good plan for this, but nothing was coming to them. Then, it was Dr. Cusino who received a light bulb. I have an idea. I overheard how the female Esper Tatsumaki only had a power level of 12 through the spy drone. If she could manage to travel cautiously and evade detection from any of Frieza's henchmen, she could retrieve his sister and pet without being detected by any of the scouters. Everyone looked at Tatsumaki, who didn't seem so keen to the idea. Does it really have to be me? Whined Tatsumaki, still not putting into perspective the gravity of Metal Bat's request. They, shouted Metal Bat, that's my family up there. I ain't letting anything happen to them, so stop being so whiny and get going. Tatsumaki was almost ready to toss Metal Bat across the room, but stopped herself at the last second and sighed in exasperation. Alright, fine. Just tell me the address and which city she's in. My house is in City F. We live on the 15th floor of the Paradise Suites, the largest apartment franchise in the city and the tallest building in the city too. Got it. Her typical green aura flickered around her, and she proceeded to float up to the top of the room. But before she could go, her sister grasped her by her wrist. Make sure you don't do anything reckless out there, said Fubuki. Tatsumaki gazed at her for a moment, and shockingly, instead of angrily retorting back at her younger sister, she gave her a small smile. Don't worry about me. I can handle myself. Tatsumaki looked back at Metal Bat. I'll try to get back here in about 3 hours. Don't wait up. Just go as fast as you can, replied Metal Bat. The female Esper gave him a small nod before going up to the latch of the room, opening it, and exiting the shelter. With that little skirmish out of the way, the attention was refocused on Saitama. The bald hero realized this and cleared his throat. Alright you all, I'd like to start our training now, but I know that most of you are probably dog-tired, and I could also really use a nap right now. I know it sounds stupid, but you saw the toll the battle took on me. Saitama's right, interjected Sitch. You all need to be fully rested for whatever sort of training you're going to be doing tomorrow. I don't want to see any foul remarks or uncooperative attitudes. Like Saitama said, all of humanity is counting on us. The heroes nodded. If that's all, then I think we're done here, finished Saitama. With that, the spectators dispersed, returning to their own activities while some of them made their way to the sleeping quarters. Saitama wiped his forehead. He was glad it managed to turn out all right. From behind him, Genos came up and stood right beside his master. Do you believe the rest of these heroes will be able to help you become more powerful? Asked Genos. I wish I could say they will, replied Saitama, but all we can do is hope, and I hope that by the end of all of this, I'll have paid for my mistakes, and everyone can rest easy again. All around the world, the citizens of the different cities were each experiencing a disaster of their own. While Frieza's assault on Earth and the utter devastation he dealt to the S-class heroes was bad, one could say that the damage dealt to the cities was arguably much worse. Due to the heroes being spread so thin and the monster executives ordering their more powerful monsters to attack throughout the globe, there simply weren't enough heroes to deal with them. The 4 S-class heroes had initially done their best, but once they retreated to fight Frieza, it left the rest of the monsters to roam free. In W City, Martial Gorilla had defeated Heavy Kong despite only being a tiger-level mysterious being. In D City, Lightning Genji was unfortunately unable to defeat his 2 opponents, Mako Plasma and Electric Catfish Man, due to their unique electric immunity. In I City, 100 Eyes Octopus was destroying the city, eating concrete buildings and any unfortunate people who might have been inside the cities. About 15 minutes 20 A-class heroes had been sent to kill the monster, and while after a very long battle they'd been able to defeat it, it had come at the price of not only the lives of several civilians and 3 of the A-class heroes. In an unknown city, the sadistic dominatrix Duess was turning heroes and regular citizens into love slaves, and she was just barely stopped by the efforts of Fubuki and the Blizzard group and forced to retreat. But perhaps the most unfortunate of these attacks was at City Y, where the monstrous vampire Pureblood had slaughtered hundreds of citizens with no heroes strong enough to stop him. Everything that these monsters had in common were 2 things: they were from the Monster Association, and they were disaster-level demon. After a while, they'd returned to the Monster Association due to previous orders from Gyoro to return to the Monster Association headquarters after causing enough damage to the hero cities. Of course, some of the monsters had stayed in the cities longer than others. It was the next day, and at the Monster Association, most of the monsters were becoming restless. At the center of the headquarters, in the throne room, many of the monsters were standing, conversing with one another. According to Gyoro, the plan was for the Cotters of the Monster Association to go with Orochi and Gyoro to go on an unknown mission which they would return from the next day. But the next day had come, and they hadn't returned. Additionally, they'd been told that part of the plan was for Elder Centipede to capture a hostage, the son of a Hero Association benefactor named Waganma. But he hadn't returned either. Standing at the center of the room were the next most powerful members of the Monster Association, such as Phoenix Man, Deus, Awakened Cockroach, Bug God, Royal Ripper, Gale Wind, Hellfire Flame, Pure Blood, and a few other demon-level monsters. Growing tumultuous on the different balconies of the headquarters, there were multiple weaker monsters, wondering what they would do without the leadership of Gyoro or the strength of the Cotters. You wonder what's going on here? Asked Awakened Cockroach. I mean, we followed orders. What more do they want from us? Their plans interrupted me from properly feasting on the populace of City Y, said Pureblood, and they don't even have the decency to return from their little mission. The only executive that's still here is that big mutt. Pureblood pointed to the dragon-level hound that had been left behind as extra protection, and also because it would have been harder for them to bring him along due to his large size and limited intelligence. At the moment, Overgrown Rover was simply sitting quietly in the corner, lying on his stomach with his paws lapped against one another. Where the hell are the rest of the executives anyway? Said Bug God. I know for a fact that Elder Centipede wasn't one of the executives who went on the mission with the others, so why hasn't he come back? Is he trying to search for the child? No. The other monsters heard the whisper of Phoenix Man, who had been relatively silent ever since he'd come back. His neck was craned downward, and he appeared to be in some kind of shock. Elder Centipede was ready to capture the hostage when he came. The other monsters gave each other confused looks. What the hell are you talking about? There was a man. The one who spoke wasn't Phoenix Man, but instead Sludge Jellyfish, who'd also been there to witness the death of Elder Centipede. A bald man. He came running out of Elder Centipede's mouth. He tore him from the inside out. One of the other demon-level monsters, Super Mouse, couldn't believe what he just heard. No way. An executive defeated like that. What's even more, continued Phoenix Man, he didn't even appear as if he was trying to kill him. And once he killed Elder Centipede, he took care of Senior Centipede and Rhino Wrestler like nothing, both of whom were also demon-level mysterious beings. So what? The one who spoke next was Royal Ripper, who didn't appear even the slightest bit disturbed over what he was hearing. They just got careless, that's all. It just goes to show how weak they really were. Don't be an idiot, Royal Ripper, said Bug God. Royal Ripper shot the insect monster a venomous look and held his blade up to the monster's face. The only reason I don't slice those mandibles off your face is because you're one of the only guys here that I sorta like. But call me that again, and it won't just be your mandibles I cut off. Fine, replied the insect monster, but whoever this guy is, we can't just ignore him. Bug God's right, continued Super Mouse, the executives are in that position for a reason. They're the strongest of all of us. If that man was able to kill Elder Centipede, he's gotta be S-class level at least. And who knows where he is or what he's doing. Phoenix Man yelled with fear in his voice. He knew the limits of his power, and without any way of protection by the other Monster Association executives, he'd be helpless against S-class heroes. Until Gyoro, Orochi, and the other Cotters return, we've got to be ready for whatever the Hero Association might have in store for us, or even something worse. That something worse was already on his way to City Z after having a good night's rest and having some quality breakfast. Lord Frieza had decided to investigate what Zarbon had told him the day before about the high power levels accumulated in this unknown city. At the moment, Frieza was sitting calmly in his hover chair, and flying beside him was Zarbon, the Jinyu Force, and about 20 other foot soldiers. How much time until our destination? Questioned Frieza. It shouldn't be more than a few minutes, my lord, replied Zarbon. What do you think we'll find once we reach there? Said Captain Jinyu. It's hard to say, but I have high hopes. Frieza recalled the many unique monsters he came across when the welcoming party came to greet him. Each of them had very interesting abilities, especially that black sperm. If he was fortunate, they might come across a few monsters with such unique abilities. The time quickly passed, and coming into view across the horizon was City Z. As the members of the Frieza Force looked upon this human city, they couldn't find anything remarkable about it. The architecture wasn't anything to comment on, and none of the buildings appeared to hold any advanced machinery or something that stood out. Perhaps this would be easier for the heroes than they thought. Everyone turn on their scouters. Change the settings on the scouters to target the energy levels with the highest readings. The Frieza Force soldiers immediately followed his order and turned on their scouters. On the ground, the citizens of City Z were attempting to go about their day as if nothing was wrong. But they knew that this could never be the case in the city they lived in. Famously known for being one of the cities with the highest number of mysterious beings, these people only had brief intervals of silence before another monster came in and wreaked havoc across the city. Even more, the citizens had only just recovered from the damage dealt by the meteor, and now after the multiple mysterious being attacks the day before, most of the citizens were shell-shocked, while only some had enough nerves to continue with their lives. On the streets, the citizens were walking on the sidewalks when a child noticed several dots appearing in the sky. "Hey look, up there." A few people bothered to pay attention to what the kid said. But once the objects were coming into view, that number multiplied, and the people began to shift nervously while quickly whispering to one another, trying to figure out exactly what it was they were seeing. As Frieza and his minions hovered only a few meters from the street, the citizens grew even more restless, while some began to quietly sprint away from them. After a few seconds of awkward silence, one of the more brave-hearted civilians spoke up. "Who are you supposed to be?" Frieza looked at the civilian for a moment and softly chuckled. He stood up from his hover chair and met eyes with Captain Ginyu. He waved his hand toward him, and Captain Ginyu quickly flew up to him. "Is this where the high energy levels are accumulated?" said Frieza softly. "That's correct, my lord," replied Captain Ginyu, pointing directly beneath them. "Many of them are gathered below us. It's unclear why exactly that's the case. Perhaps they're having some sort of important meeting." "Yes, that seems like a good assumption." Frieza stood up and softly floated out of his chair, eliciting several more small gasps of shock from the spectating citizens who'd chosen to stay. But what happened next was enough to get nearly all of the remaining civilians to run away in terror. From the palm of the Space Emperor's hand, a ball of energy was formed. That ball of energy quickly descended onto the road, creating a very large blast that sent concrete flying in all directions. A few blocks of the concrete flew at Frieza and the genius, but they were able to effortlessly dodge or destroy these concrete blocks. Now, these space pirates weren't quite sure what to expect hidden underneath the road, but none of them were expecting to see this monumental spiral column with very advanced architectural designs. Despite this, for some reason, there was some sort of slime and glue over metal sheets. This presumably meant that despite the building's advanced design, it was still quite aged and was starting to fall apart in some areas. Frieza squinted his eyes to try and see at the bottom of this very large spiral staircase, and what he noticed were several forms huddled together. "I believe we have found what we are looking for." Frieza's smile came to cover his entire face as it widened with giddy anticipation. "Let us deliver them a proper welcome." The genius and Zarbon straightened their bodies and obediently shouted, "Yes, sir." The space pirates proceeded to gently float down, taking note as they were going down the several different hallways that spanned throughout the headquarters. "Rakum's head is spinnin'," said the Ginyu Force member. Once the aliens started to come into the view of the monsters standing at the bottom, many of the demon-level mysterious beings began to take defensive stances. Many of the other weaker monsters began to tense up and quietly whisper to themselves, wondering what exactly was going on here. "What a pleasure to make your acquaintance," shouted Frieza. The Space Emperor and his minions stopped their descent once they were about 5-10 meters from the ground. Once they did, each of them began to look around them and really eye what they were looking at. At the bottom of this impressively large spiral staircase, there was a throne room, only without a king to sit in it. "I noticed that there is a very large seat in the center of this room meant for a king." But Frieza innocently held his hands out and stared at the other monsters. "It appears none of you have taken up the mantle. So, seeing as how I wouldn't want that seat to remain empty, it seems only fitting that someone should take that seat." Frieza didn't bother to wait for any proper responses and quickly flew to the throne, where he calmly rested his bottom and eagerly smiled at the other monsters while putting his fingers to his chin. "Well, that's a rather bold move," muttered Phoenix Man, having seen many monsters with overinflated egos but still surprised that this monster would take such a defiant action, as if to say he was already ruler of all of the monsters in this room. "Who are you?" said Awakened Cockroach, "and how did you know about this place? Since you are all so keen on acquiring my identity, I will assuage your curiosities." Frieza stood up from the throne and took a stance in which he extended his arms and bent his back slightly forward. "My name is Lord Frieza. I am the Emperor of the Universe, and I have voyaged to your planet for my own curiosity, and to determine whether there is anything of interest." I was greeted with great alacrity from— "Hold on," interrupted Royal Ripper, holding his blade arm up to Frieza. "The hell does alacrity mean?" "Who inquired?" Frieza took a second to search the crowd of monsters and saw the monster in question holding a blade up to him. The Space Emperor squinted his eyes and attempted to study the monster, and the first thing he immediately took from him was that he had a thirst for blood. Being a fervent sadist himself, he could sense killing intent, and while the other monsters did indeed have killing intent, that monster there took it to a whole different level. To answer your question, alacrity means great enthusiasm. And the ones who greeted me with such alacrity were none other than the Hero Association and a few other monsters such as yourself. Hushed whispers began to spread like wildfire through the crowd of monsters. Even the demon-level mysterious beings felt their hearts skip a beat. It didn't take a genius to put the pieces together and determine that Orochi, Gyoro, and the rest of the executive members of the Monster Association had already met with this Frieza. Unfortunately for them, they were unwilling to display any hospitality, so I had no choice but to eliminate them all. This was the last straw that caused the monsters to erupt in tumultuous panic. Some of them broke out in nervous sweats, and a few of them even had a nervous breakdown. Likewise, the demon-level mysterious beings felt a few shudders of dismay go down their spines. They all knew the amazing power the executives of the Monster Association possessed. If what Frieza was saying was really true, then none of them stood a sliver of a chance against him. "That can't be true," shouted Sludge Jellyfish. "The executives are too powerful to all be eliminated." Frieza innocently shrugged his shoulders. "I expected the clouds of doubt to shroud your minds, so I decided to bring something that would clear those clouds of doubt and make you come to terms with the power I possess. You see, I did manage to bring a little souvenir from the battle. Captain Ginyu, if you would. The souvenir is in my hover chair." "Yes, Lord Frieza." Captain Ginyu went up to his master's hover chair and quickly found what he was looking for. He quickly threw it to his master, who caught it and held it out for the other monsters to see. It was the severed head of Orochi, the leader of the Monster Association. "I believe this is the head of your king who once sat on this throne I'm standing on now," said Frieza, relishing the looks of fear and the aura of terror emanating from most of the monsters in the room. I must admit, he possessed quite some power, as did the other monsters who accompanied him. Well, for most standards. But for my standards, I must say that they came exceptionally low. To his misfortune, his power simply was not enough, and it only took me using 1/100th of my full power to eliminate him. Frieza failed to mention that Orochi came dangerously close to ending his life, and that he needed to transform to access his full power. But failing to mention this only served as fuel for the terror and hopelessness that struck the hearts of the monsters. Now, knowing monsters such as yourselves, I can assume that even after all of this, some of you may still harbor doubts and insist on defying me, so I will now demonstrate just a fraction of my power to all of you in this room. Frieza held his finger up in the air and kept it there for a few seconds, confusing the monsters and heightening the intensity of the atmosphere as well as further adding drama to what would happen next. From his fingertip, a tiny ball of orange energy formed. That orange ball of energy began to swell up like a balloon, gaining mass and potency by the second. In no less than 10 seconds, the ball of energy had become large enough to encompass the entire upper ceiling of the room and reach up to the lower levels of the spiral staircase. The Space Emperor grinned and flicked his hand into the air. The ball of energy instantly soared into the sky, and mere moments later, exploded in an absolutely stunning fashion. While the energy ball exploded well above the city, the force and brightness of the energy blast was enough to reach the underground base. Many of the buildings of City Z began to shake, their foundations being loosened by such quaking, and a few of the smaller buildings even fell apart. At the bottom of the headquarters, many of the monsters had to shield their eyes for a few moments. Once the light died down, they slowly turned their heads back to Frieza, who was basking in the glory of his power and their fear. "Not only am I capable of producing such potent energy blasts," continued Frieza, "but the energy coursing within me grants me immeasurable stores of strength." For instance, Frieza craned his arm back. He then proceeded to yell loudly and throw a punch to the spectating monsters. Fortunately for the monsters, this punch didn't make contact, but the force of this single punch created extremely high-speed gusts of wind. These gusts of wind threw all of the monsters off of their feet and caused many of the pillars in the room to shatter, which in turn caused the floors that were supported by these pillars to fall apart, destroying a few floors of the headquarters in the process. So for any of you smart monsters in this room who might have been suspecting or theorizing that while I do possess the ability of energy projection yet lack any physical prowess or hand-to-hand combat abilities, I regrettably inform you that you are mistaken. In a dramatic move, Frieza shot his finger up again into the sky and shouted, "However, while many of you may be fearful that I am here to end your lives, I am here to assure you that this is not the case." Frieza decided to make another dramatic move and floated off of his throne and into the center crowd of demon-level mysterious beings. He stared at the monsters for a moment and proceeded to walk into this crowd. The monsters immediately backed away to let Frieza walk unobstructed. The Space Emperor walked through with his hands held together behind his back, as if what he were doing were a routine inspection. While he was walking, he was taking close-up looks at many of the monsters. He took great interest in the monsters and how unique their appearances were. As he was looking at these monsters, one of the first ones he took notice of was a monster with a shower head for a head. Well, said Frieza, standing in front of Showerhead while the other monsters took a few steps back. I've never seen a creature with such an interesting design as yours. What is your name? Showerhead took a few seconds to compose himself, since he was still afraid of Frieza and the power he possessed. My name is Showerhead, and I'm a demon-level threat. Well, that name certainly isn't original. But what was that last part you said? Demon-level threat. What exactly does that mean? Showerhead cleared his throat and straightened himself to give a proper response. Well, many of us here categorize our power through certain rankings originally created by the Hero Association. The order is Wolf, the weakest ranking that can barely put up a fight. Tiger, a threat that can cause minor disruption. Demon, a very powerful threat that can threaten an entire city. Dragon, an extremely powerful threat that threatens multiple cities. And the most powerful level is God, a threat that endangers all of humanity. The executives were all dragon-level mysterious beings, while most of us here are demon-level mysterious beings. After hearing this, Frieza chuckled with delight and a sense of pride. So I'm assuming I'm the first god-level threat you've ever come across. Showerhead slowly bobbed his head up and down. Excellent, and let's see what your power level is. Frieza targeted his scouter to Showerhead and widened his eyes at what he saw. 12,000, not bad at all. Now then, who else? Frieza resumed his walking and decided to measure the power levels of everyone else, and came across several very impressive results. 15,000, 20,000, 17,000, 22,000, and several more power levels ranging in the 10,000s and bordered on the 20,000 marker. But he quickly was met with a surprise when he came across two warriors that had power levels of 30,000. These warriors were two youthful humanoid individuals, with one of them having long wavy blonde hair, and the other having short and spiked black hair. And who might you two be? My name is Gale Wind, said the warrior with blonde hair, and this is my partner, Hellfire Flame. I noticed your power levels are a few thousand above your associates. I'm assuming you're demon-level mysterious beings though. Well, yes, replied Hellfire Flame. However, this isn't the fullest extent of our power. Is that so? Inquired Frieza. Well, if you wouldn't mind, please reveal to me the fullest extent of your power. The two ninja monsters did as Frieza asked and began to unleash the restraints put in their human forms. As they allowed the power gained from the monster cells to be unleashed, their bodies began to morph and twist in size. Gale Wind's teeth sharpened, his skin gained black markings, his hair began to stand up on its ends, his scalp sprouting, and his eyes began to twist like a lizard while his pupils momentarily disappeared. Hellfire Flame's teeth also sharpened, and his eyes twisted like a lizard as well while his pupils disappeared. The monster's veins pulsated as his body was supplying the power it needed to transform. His fingers sharpened into deadly claws, and his entire body was now imbued with burning flames. On the scouter, the power levels of Gale Wind and Hellfire Flame drastically rose to 60,000. Which only served to excite and please Frieza. My, it appears you were holding back quite some power. Without you telling me, I'd say your power in this form makes you both dragon-level mysterious beings. That's correct, responded Hellfire Flame. Very impressive. Frieza looked at the two transformed monsters, but then a dark object hidden behind them caught Frieza's eye. Frieza walked through the two ninjas, who quickly shuffled out of the way, and chuckled when he saw that this was a large dog. And what is this canine? That's Overgrown Rover, answered Super Mouse. He's an executive member of the Monster Association and a dragon-level threat. Not only is he immensely strong, but he also has the ability to fire powerful energy balls. Frieza scanned Overgrown Rover's power level and let out one of his signature oh-hos. His power level is 100,000. What an extraordinary find. The Genius and Zarbon let out gasps of disbelief. 100,000, said Jace. That's almost as powerful as the captain. How could a dog become so powerful? Questioned Raccoon. How indeed. Frieza then directed himself towards the rest of the demon-level mysterious beings in the group. All of you undoubtedly have power and abilities that could be very useful in my army. Now, I'm unsure of the reasons why you've all come together to create this organization, but I can make a few guesses. Frieza lifted his hands up and proceeded to float into the air. I myself am an active pursuer of power, pleasure, and dominance. I have gained these things through my empire and the power I possess, but in order to properly run my empire, I require soldiers. Soldiers who will obey my orders and will enforce my rule without question. How they enforce my rule and what they do in their free time matters not to me. All that matters is getting the message through to my conquered subjects. If you join me, I can assure all of you that not only will you be able to enjoy yourselves and quench your thirst for blood, but through my training and my resources, I can make you all even stronger than before. Even strong enough to reach the level of dragon. Frieza looked up at the rest of the monsters standing quietly on the balconies. As for the rest of you, as long as you are strong enough to pull your own weight, you can still have places in the Frieza force where you can live and do as you please under my rule. So I give you a choice. Frieza held out his palms to the monsters and calmly smiled. Option number 1. You pledge your loyalty to me and officially become members of the Frieza Force, where you will mostly get to live the lives you want with a few exceptions. Or, in his right palm, Frieza formed a purple ball of energy. You can attempt to challenge me right here and die a slow and painful death. Which will it be? Either way, I will get some form of reward. The chamber was deathly quiet. All of the monsters were processing everything that they'd just witnessed and trying to figure out what they could do. Based on everything they'd just been shown, if any of them tried to fight Frieza, it would be a complete slaughter. So what choice did they have? Alright, the first one to break the silence was none other than Royal Ripper, who didn't seem fazed at all by what he'd just seen. As long as I get to cut up as many people as I want, I don't have a problem with it. Will you make sure I have plenty of victims to satisfy my killing urges? But of course, said Frieza, and what of the rest of you? The room remained quiet for a few more seconds. Then, out of nowhere, one of the monsters in the crowd shook its fist in the air and softly shouted, Frieza. Another monster decided to follow up and began chanting as well. Soon, many of the monsters joined in the chant, until so many of the monsters had joined in the chant that even the demon-level mysterious beings in the middle of the room got caught up in the chant. The loud chants echoed through the very large chamber. Frieza, 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 Frieza. In the air, the Genius and Zarbon were surprised by this sudden change of tone and decided to join in on the fun. So along with the rest of the monsters, they chanted their master's name with joy. In the center of the room, Frieza felt like he was walking on sunshine, being given praise and glory by the weak and knowing that their fear of him was controlling their minds and their actions. It was everything he'd come to enjoy about being Emperor of the Universe. Now, he'd gained control of hundreds of monsters and at least a dozen soldiers as powerful as his right-hand man. At last, everything has come together so elegantly. Planet Earth is now in the palm of my hands. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for another story and adaptation. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.